it's a really important time right now, and it's an important topic that we all kind of acknowledge what's going on as far as racism, as far as police brutality, as far as like what's going on in our society. So I just wanted to open it up by starting with Marty, because you mentioned in your sermon that what we had to do was be a listener and a learner before we can be a critic, right? When it comes to certain things. Right. Can you share a little bit about where that came from?
Some of that just comes from me personally, spiritually, is how I react to things. I try not to overreact, because many who listen to me know, I mean, I was radio, TV, and film major in school. I've also understand the media side of things a little bit, and I know how they get their ratings. I know how they try to change our minds on certain things, whatever their particular agenda might be. And so some of that is that I see folks of all generations get a little bit bent out of place because of what they see, and a lot of times what they see or what they hear from social media or on the TV isn't always the whole story, and we all know that. So you got to listen, you got to learn. One of the first things that I did dealing with this sort of topic and this sort of deal is I think about all my guys that I bled on the field with, that I'm friends with. And so I called Tyrone. I mean, he took the time to talk to me. I called one of our other buddies, Fred Miller, and Fred was actually an NFL guy too. It just happens that I have teamed up with these guys afterwards and at least keep in touch with them. And my roommate, I haven't called him, but my roommate in college, Bradford Lewis, is a coach down La Vega High. And so, I mean, just great men that I knew that were of other, different color, even though I didn't grow up around, black people. And so I knew that I needed to learn and I needed to listen. I needed to figure out why, what was going on behind the scenes, other than just there was a bad cop there, or whatever it is. And so wanted to hear some things. So that's vitally important as a disciple of Christ. We need to be learning all the time. And so
you had to be intentional to reach out and have those conversations.
And you need to be intentional too in your faith and in what your understandings are. I think a lot of times we think that you have your opinion and you've arrived and then you're done. And it's like that's the universal thing for you for the rest of your life. That makes no sense, especially when you think of biblical characters like Abraham were 90 years old and they were learning stuff. So, I mean, why wouldn't we, take the time to listen and learn? And so that's vitally important, because part of that goes back to social media and people behind the scenes on emails or posts or whatever. Everybody is a critic.
Right.
And as a pastor, I mean, you deal with that all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, everything you say is criticized, everything that you do nowadays in leadership, especially coming out of the COVID thing. Should we open the church? Should we not open the church? Why aren't you opening the church? Why aren't you preaching on that? Why don't you talk about that? I mean, everything's criticized, not in always negative, but it is. And so I knew I didn't want to do that to people that were, black or brown or blue or whatever it was, and so I wanted to take some time to listen and learn.
Yeah.
So I think that's vitally important.
Yeah.
It's a long answer, but that's the spiritual heart of it.
Well, from your perspective, Ann and Tyrone, from a black person's perspective, what is going on with our nation right now? And what is, from y'all's point of view, what have you guys been thinking about? What's been going on with y'all in your heart and in your mind?
Well, it's definitely been a stressful time. It's really hard, not just for people of color, for the whole world, everybody's. And one of the things that's interesting is seeing this touch the whole world. It's not just America. Every continent you go to, there's something that has been awakened by all of this. It's something that, as a person of color, I've lived with my whole life, but it's hard to explain it to someone who has not lived it. Right. And it's one of the things that I find personally that has been hardest is that the way it can change the way you feel. What I mean by that is I don't want to be where I take the white race and say that all the white race is bad. But there are times when I find that I have a negative thought that stems from that. As an example, this goes way back, but during childhood, I grew up during the 60s. So I can remember times when I could not go into a restaurant and I could not there were bathrooms that were for colored and for white. And those were very painful things that affected my self-esteem and, who I became as a person. Yeah. My parents were not fighters. They were people that sort of just kind of, took things as they come. My dad was a car salesman. He also had a retail grocery store. So I lived in pretty much a black world. We lived in neighborhoods that were predominantly black. The only whites in the neighborhood generally were like shopkeepers or something like that. But I could remember times when I would go like into a store like a Macy's or something like that, and you go to purchase something, and the person would not, the white salesperson would not touch your hand. They wouldn't take the money in your hand.
That's crazy.
You had to, and when you got your change, it was literally thrown down on the counter at you. And I could remember how that made me feel so degraded.
Yeah.
So when I say that I don't want that to translate to me condemning the white race because of that incident, there are times when something happens and there's like this flashback that comes, and I'm thinking, I'm wondering if that was because I'm black and they're white, that particular incident happened, or I'm feeling this way.
Yeah. Tyrone, from your perspective, what have you been thinking? What have you been feeling? What's going on in your
as an African American male, when Marty called me, I was like, thank you for calling, because I think it's about time for having like intentional, real, genuine, hard conversations.
Right.
Because there haven't been like the conversations really to talk about all the civil unrest and social injustice that's actually been going on in the world for a long time now. It's not just recently, but it's been going on. And so now here we are with George Floyd's death, and everybody's listening. And now since everybody's listening, how can we really take full advantage of this opportunity and time to really facilitate the conversation? Because one of the things that Marty and I talked about, Marty, what it boils down to now, we have these hard conversations. And with having these hard conversations, you're going to have some people, they're going to be willing to have those hard conversations. And some people would like to remain stuck and ignorant where they are. They want to like stay in their world because what's going on does not affect them. But yet I feel that as a leader, I think it starts with the church. And I think, in the church, if the leader of the church is really just bringing forth a call to action to really have intentional conversations and to encourage parishioners and members to have conversations as well, to seek understanding and then keep the conversation going, I think that's going to be critical and key, because with everything that's going on, your heart hurt. For me, as an African-American man, to drive, every time I get pulled over by the cops, I wonder how this is gonna go, right? How's it gonna go?
That's your default. That's
just my default, and you can't help but wonder. And when I was young, I would go into the stores and people would like follow me and watch me. I'm like, I have money in my pocket, right? And so I go back to it, I'm start thinking like, so you want to go there? And so, but where we are right now, it's a good time. Because I truly feel and believe that God wants the land to be healed. But it has to be intentional conversations that are had like around the world in the community consistently to move forward, to bring a balance. Because right now there's a great imbalance. And I think the thing is that some people are going to still stay stuck. But even despite that, I'm grateful that so many people are willing to listen. Because, if you've never been an African-American man and got pulled over and you start wondering, how's it going to turn out? You can never feel those emotions or vibes, right?
Yeah.
But I think you can have those conversations with others and really have a genuine, honest conversation. And it's like Marty said, there have been so many teammates that I played football with, whether it's in the NFL or even in college, like, Tyrone, I'm sorry. Man, it's okay. You don't have to apologize because I know your heart, right? John Patterson. Yeah. He's like, Tyrone, I'm sorry, man. I was like, John, you don't have to apologize, man. I just need you to snap the ball better in college.
Right,
exactly. You know what I mean?
Deep snap.
Just deep snap the ball, man. But outside of that, I say, John, I know your heart, man.
Yeah.
I say, but whatever opportunity you have to have the conversation when you hear people talking, and they have no idea, man, don't be afraid to like speak up and correct.
I was thinking when you were talking about conversation, like give it an example of a healthy conversation. Like, do you think, like, be intentional about, like, what does that include?
Okay, can I share?
Yeah.
Okay, so I had a conversation with a group of guys I meet with.
Yep.
It sounded like a joke, you know what I'm saying? Five white guys and a black guy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
One's a doctor, one's a therapist, one's a pastor. You know what I mean? One's Ty Beasley on and one's Ty Lord. It's true. I mean, you know, and the African American guy, he's a former NFL player.
Yeah.
I mean, so it sounded like a joke. I told him one day.
you did.
And I asked the guys, I said, guys, I want to ask you all something. Tell me, how do you all feel about everything going on with all the civil unrest with George Floyd?
Right.
A pregnant pause. It was just quiet.
Yeah.
And the first guy, he like, man, you know what, Tyrone, man? He said, I have nothing to say. He said, I have nothing to say because if I say something, I'm going to stick my foot in my mouth.
Man.
I said, thank you for your honesty.
Yeah.
Other guy said, Tyrone, I have nothing to say. He said, because I can't even relate. I can't relate at all. I mean, I have nothing whatsoever. And the third guy, he was like, Tyrone, my heart hurts, man, because I'm a retired attorney, and my wife actually mentors and tutors George Floyd's niece. You know, and we talked to the family, and man, my heart, man, is really hurting for the Floyd family. And the other guy, he was like, man, I believe everything that the African Americans are doing right now as far as being upset, rioting, all that is necessary because for so many years they've been oppressed. So I agree with everything they're doing right now. Last guy, he was like, I just had a birthday this past weekend. I'm a doctor. I'm pretty successful. Went out of town. And he said, but at my age, he's 75 years old. He said, I volunteered during the civil rights era to help and support the civil rights movement. He said, so I can recall a moment in time in my 20s when I got pulled over. He said, the cop pulled me over and just totally disrespected me, and I'm a white man. He said, as I drove off, I wondered, how would that have turned out if I would have been black? He said, so I feel, I understand, and I know, and I can relate in a sense, but not totally relate. He said, but went away for my birthday this weekend, and my wife and I are on two separate sides of the fence on this situation because she feel that we shouldn't have went out of town for my birthday. I'm trying to celebrate 75 years of living. On the other hand, she's thinking about, we need to get back to SU. What if those protesters go in our house?
Right.
I need to be by my gun so I can do what I need to do. He said, I can't have a healthy conversation with her right now. And so when you think about that, it just speaks to people don't know or they don't want to know.
Right.
But they know, but they want to bring about change. And so in that, there will only be change if there are the hard conversations. And the second guy that said he couldn't relate, he called me later that day. He was like, Tyrone, I'm so glad you asked that question. He said, help me, although I had nothing to say, I'm so glad you asked it.
It's interesting because, again, I talked about it Sunday as a white man on a lot of I can't relate to any of that. So why am I going to be the critic on a lot of stuff? I mean, I have no idea, on certain things. And so I don't know why we don't want to know other people's experiences, and that's what those critical conversations are. Right. Tell me your experience, and then I actually can listen and believe it too, and it's, we like to live in our little bubbles.
Right.
Yeah, no, we do.
I mean, I do too.
We get comfortable, I think. And we kind of think like, things, things are not like they were in 1965 or whatever. It's like, we have to acknowledge that at the root of racism, and I loved earlier you said the church is the key to changing things, because at the root of prejudice and racism is sin. And that lives in the heart of man. In order to fix the racism problem and prejudice issues, we have to do a better job fixing the heart and letting people know. So here's where I'm going with this question is, how do we connect our identity in Christ with our cultural identities, our ethnic identities? God saves people of all colors, races, and all this kind of stuff. In heaven will be, there'll be many tribes and nations and tongues, and it's not like we get to heaven and we're all just like look alike or something. Like, this is not going to happen like that. But how do we at the same time say the solution is Christ, but at the same time acknowledge the hurt and really support, men and women of black color, and really support them?
Well, I think the part you say about our identity in Christ, like you said, when we get to heaven, there's not going to be a white section,
Right.
Yeah.
A different ethnic group sections or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
We have to recognize that Christ is about love, and that's where it starts. And love your neighbor as yourself.
Yes.
It's kind of as basic as that. When you have people who profess to be Christian and to have Christian faith, and you see the things that go on in the name of Christianity, it really challenges you to give a hard thought and to really look into your own soul to see where you are with that, because it's not that can go with no matter what ethnic group too. As an African American, I can still have a feeling that, as I said earlier, like that I might feel like I don't like the white race or something, or I don't like this particular group of the white race or whatever. But if I'm a Christian, I love everyone. I'm not perfect. So there's going to be times when you kind of fall off the wagon with that. But if you go back to that same basic principle that Christ gave us, love one another, love one another as you love yourself, then I think that's a good place to start. And it's about listening. That's the big thing. Is this about really opening up and listening? Because so many times we all have our own prejudice and our own beliefs, and it's hard. It's hard for any of us to be open and hear the other person's story and really try to identify with them, not just hear it, but to be able to empathize and hear the feelings behind the words.
I've been trying to slow down a lot when I hear even my wife talk about this, or like we'll get into conversations. It's like usually I am formulating my next thought, but while she's talking or while someone else is even explaining things. But now it's like I feel like I need to slow down so that I can really try to understand what you're saying.
Right.
Because if I don't jump to conclusions, there's probably a better way forward, instead of just like, you hold your ground, I'll hold my ground, and then we'll kind of, it's like, that's, at the end of the day, I need to listen more than and this goes back to your, being a critic. But so what about you guys? Like,
I do like what you're saying about not letting past experiences affect how you look at a race. Or affect how it determines how you look at a group of people. I grew up in Acres Homes, went to school in Acres Homes, predominantly all black schools. It was tough being in an environment where I'm half Hispanic, half white, and to Hispanics, I'm white, and to whites, I'm Hispanic, and to blacks, I'm either white or Hispanic. They didn't know where to put me, and so I never really had a place where I fit in, And then I went to Nimitz, which is in Aldine, for high school, and also another predominantly black school. And it was during Katrina, when all the Louisiana kids came over. And,
that's a lot.
Louisiana kids, they were another
different,
another
level, man. Our school got pretty bad. We had riot police. We had snipers on the roof.
Wow.
My dad dropped me off for school one day, and there were snipers on the roof. And my mom's like, "You still dropped them off? Like, what are you thinking?" But we would walk through the hallways, and they would warn you the day before, and they'd say, "Just letting you guys know, all whites are getting jumped tomorrow."
Yeah.
Oh wow.
And it would happen. You'd walk into school, and luckily at that point they saw me as Hispanic, and
you're good.
I wasn't one of the ones that got jumped, but there'd be times when an entire race would get jumped just because of the color of their skin, And at our school, whites were the minority. And so that's different to see it that way, because they were made to feel like the minority and purposely made to feel like the minorities, harassed daily, So I kind of felt what the whites were feeling, but then at the same time, I didn't have to fully experience what they were going through either. So it's difficult when you grow up in an all-black school and have to make sure that your experiences don't affect how you treat a race later.
Right.
You know, because the same with anything, you can't judge a race based off the actions of few.
Right.
You know, and that's the same way I feel about how you can't judge the police force by the action of some bad police officers.
Right.
You know,
There's bad everywhere.
there's bad everywhere. You know, there's bad in the white race. There's
everywhere.
bad in
Bad
the Hispanic race. There's bad in the black race. It's there, and like you said,
bad
it's
everywhere.
it's derivative of sin. And so until everyone can start to find Christ and find their way back to Christ, because I feel like that's been definitely been lacking in our community and lacking in our nation, is Christ is being taken out of schools and being taken out of houses and being taken out of anywhere that they can pull Christ out of. It's you've noticed a change, you know, in order for us to become one nation and to become one nation under God like it's supposed to be, you know, we have to go back to God. And if we don't do that, then we'll continue to be a ununited nation. And that's not where we want to be.
I think the biggest thing too is just that, you know, African Americans was like the only race that was oppressed and like, you know, forced to come to this country, right? And I think, you know, that's like a lot of the deeper
history.
issues, the histories, all the unaddressed things that have never really been spoken out in an open way, where we can see how can we have a true resolution, how can we like really be like genuine in what is that needs to be heard. And so I think that, and then you think back to just the systematic racism, where you have, you know, people who've been raised a certain way, all behaviors and learned behaviors, and they have these behaviors internally that they outwardly project, and they have no idea because it's a part of their life and their world, and how we talked about it, how your great grandfather and grandfather, you know what I mean, pretty much instilled this in the way you perceive others. And so I think that's like a big thing. And that's why I told, you know, John Patterson, I say, John, continue to talk, continue to have conversations, and when you have those questions, ask the questions. And I think that has to to go beyond this week, right? Moving forward, you know, and it boils down to, man, that, you know, Matthew 5:16, let your light shine before men. If you live, love, and honor the Lord, and all you're called to do, let your light shine, and have love in your heart to do and live the right way unto your fellow man, your neighbor. And I think if people really have a heart for God, right, you shouldn't think or feel that way,
for sure.
But you know what I mean?
Yeah.
What have you been exposed to, right? What's that learned behavior?
Yeah, and I was listening to a podcast, and I thought it made a good point about the idea that a lot of people have been victims, of the just systemic racism, and they didn't even know it. You know, they've been tricked. And I think that's the thing, like that's a distortion about race and the value of humans, other humans, people that don't look like you, act like you, those type of things. It also happens in our own lives. I mean, we fool ourselves all the time. Oh, that's okay. I'm going to just keep that sin around, you know, it's all good, you know? And so that happens all the time. And so as Christians, we are called to constantly be working, allowing the Holy Spirit to work on us. So why would we ever assume that one experience, that might have shaped some of our thoughts, but should it shape it for the rest of our lives? Probably not. And so we have been tricked, been duped, been victims of things and victimized by things. I thought those were some interesting comments that I heard in a podcast to help me as a white guy just go, okay, maybe where am I missing it? Or maybe I've got it right. You know, maybe it does come down to the Lord and just living as strong as I can in the Lord. And I'm not going to treat people like others are. I'm going to treat them like myself, you know, love them.
At one level, you know, sin, I don't want to act like it's too easy. Like it's you know, I just need to pray and I'll get over this, whatever. Because like you said, there's some default ways that we were raised that are ingrained in us. But yet Christ has the power to change those. So at one level, that's right. Oh my goodness. At one level, it's easy. At one level, it's very difficult. You know, but I
sin
think
is easier than being
Right.
good.
Good.
You know?
Right.
Yeah.
Then
Right.
rooting
Yeah.
it out.
Right.
sometimes.
Right. Because it's all
We all know
internal.
that.
It's all in our heart.
Can I say three things
Yes.
about things that I've learned? So I've been listening and learning, and as I was listening to a couple of podcasts, reading some things, the term that I heard, anti-racism, was brought up, and I thought that was interesting. We often think about just being a racist, but in the anti-racism idea is that anybody can have racist thoughts or actions or things like that. And so we should hold each other accountable for those things. And so that being said, I don't believe I'm a racist, but there might be a comment that I make. Maybe Tyrone and I are hanging out and I say something that's kind of, so I wouldn't see that from my perspective. He could hold me accountable, but he's not trying to shame me. He's just holding me accountable. Right. And I think maybe some of that stuff is that we feel shame for some of our viewpoints, and shame doesn't ever change anything. It just holds you prisoner. And that's a spiritual issue. And so we need to be real careful. And I've heard some rational voices on both sides talking about that idea, because sometimes we don't always have to feel shame. That doesn't help anybody, and it certainly doesn't help some of your racist thoughts or actions or things like that. Also, and so, they said it, and I summarized it, shame is not a anti-racist tool. That's not a healthy place to, that's where you don't want your faith built on that. And then also that we need to understand that without, I think, the Black Christian or the African American Christian voice, we're going to have very little change if we don't have that voice and listen to that voice in a lot of things, because it's vitally important to the racial conversation and injustices and things like that. And just as a pastor, I'm just bringing it back. I think it's the Christian side of that. It's the healthy. I know that there are great things that are said in the world around us and things like that. We should listen to everybody and learn. But I think that as Tyrone said, the church is vitally important. That's kind of my closing comments on those things. Things that I'm just dealing with, learning, trying to change my maybe verbiage on.
Can I push back just on one small thing? Is like, how can a church like John Wesley push into that more and try to be a more diverse? Because we kind of exist in a specific community. When it comes to race, socials, you know what I mean? So how can a church... So that's
one of the biggest struggles that I've heard from all of our members is like, what can I do? And I think a lot of times what we tend to do is we tend to move into shame of some sort, or we're not that, or we can't feel that. And that's why I said, listen and learn, first of all, and don't be a critic, because being a critic shuts down the conversation. Then you have no intentional conversation. So intentional conversations, listening to people, trying to see their perspective on things. And this does not have to be a Republican Democratic thing. We want it. America just loves to make it all that, and the news does, and everything else. Can it not just be human, equality issue and problem? Because we know there's all sorts of bad in the world. So why don't we listen to where some of this bad is internally in systems or whatever. So that is a struggle. I think we're still trying to answer that question.
Yeah, it's ongoing.
Being intentional, I talked about that. Being a listener and a learner, and then maybe praying about being more diverse within our own church. That would be a good thing.
All right. Well, thank you guys. I appreciate y'all's time.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, brother. Thank y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you.